Josh, I don't know if you have a coffee, but cheers.
Oh, I already drank mine. Cheers. Another busy week, which we love to see. Busy stuff keeps us out of trouble.
Couldn't imagine you getting into trouble.
Trouble's my middle name.
Anybody trying to arrest Josh would be very fearful. Josh is 6'8", so he's a pretty tall guy.
My favorite thing is pictures when Ryan and I stand beside each other because it reminds me how tall I am. Because I always forget.
I look like your bearded child, but it is what it is. Well, I'm excited to dig in with you. I think you mentioned you had some different interesting reports around compliance, sourcing candidates, business development as a whole. So yeah, let's dive in. What'd you look into?
I have a couple really interesting topics, so I thought we'd see where kind of the old conversation takes us. The first one I actually had was some negative publicity for AI. So I'll actually share my screen so we can look at this one together. But the most interesting thing that I saw, so this is an article that came out from the BBC, hiring tools maybe filtering out the best job applicants. The biggest thing that this article was talking on, there's a couple of quotes that were going through it as well. We're just talking through the concepts of how AI is actually increasing bias inside of the interview processes too. And just talking about how it was missing great candidates throughout screening process, and based on keywords, some people were actually missing out on job opportunities too. And so I actually want to talk through some ideas around the biggest difference between AI and automation, and really where does bias come from?
How do you think that differs from just like a Boolean search?
It's pushing the blame, and that's
Yeah,
exactly what I
that's what I'm
think too.
saying. It's like Boolean search. Oh, this candidate didn't show up because they put on their title marketeur rather than
Yeah.
market or something like that, and therefore it didn't show up in the Boolean search. So I think like AI is going to change obviously how we search, and it's going to be more of a black box, I think, for the users around like how are these searches actually being generated and how are these recommendations being generated. So I think it's on us as like technology companies that are powering this shift to provide more information around how are we actually sourcing these candidates. How do we actually take the prompt that you give us or the cue that you give us and more effectively educate you around how we're actually filtering candidates so that you're aware of the gaps. The Boolean search, it's pretty clear. I think it still has the chance to do the exact same harm, but I think where it's better as like, well, it obviously didn't show up because they didn't have this keyword. Like it's just black and white like that. I don't think it's a bigger problem. I think it's just harder to understand why it's happening because of the lack of understanding around how the AI functionality actually works.
AI is just technology. It's a bunch of numbers in the background that are helping us find information, right? And especially when you're thinking about that whole concept of the difference of AI versus automation. Automation is there to help automate process that you're doing internally. The whole goal of AI is to help surface great information, right? Like I was actually reading this other article too, which I thought was, right? So they had the example, if you had 1,000 applicants that actually came in at a given time, the goal is not to automate which applicants you reach out to using AI. The goal is to use AI to take away that manual process of going through 1,000 applications and trying to read what everyone actually does, and actually use it to surface some of the best recommendations of candidates based on certain attributes that you're looking for. The individuals who train the AI are the ones who are creating the bias. And there's this really, really cool webinar that I started to watch. So shout out to Appcast here, because I thought this so far, I'm only 10 minutes in, but it's a great example here. And they were actually talking about this study that was done through the University of Waterloo and Duke. And they were actually looking at the type of language that was used and how like neutral language or like gender-based language actually increases the likelihood that certain genders are actually looking to apply for jobs versus not. So whether that's more male candidates or female candidates or others, whatever, however people look to identify here. But the use of the language through a lot of the sourcing mechanisms that we're using have a huge impact to who actually even tries to apply. How can we pass the buck to say that it's actually somebody else's fault as we're looking at it versus just taking the ownership on us to say, well, we're the ones who programmed the model to do whatever it's looking to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't think on its own, at least not yet. That's some Terminator shit though. But for the time being, especially,
It does have the potential, and it likely is increasing bias by not being conscious around how we're actually using it. We just posted like 4 job postings. Like we're growing like crazy here, which we're super fortunate to be. Did I write any of those job postings? Our friend ChatGPT wrote all of them for us. All I said was, hey, we have this open role, this is some technology stack that we use that is a need to have of them to be familiar with. And then here's some things that would be really nice to have but aren't requirements. Make a job post. I could have provided more direction around like the types of candidates that we want to see, or being more proactive in letting it know like, hey, also make sure that this job posting would attract like a diverse audience.
Oh, exactly right. And just using like the term that the Appcast team was using, like neutral language. I think to your exact point, Ryan, like the whole idea of using AI is to help us expedite our process, right? So make you 30% more efficient. The less that we focus on that, the more that we allow this unconscious bias to come into our processes, because we're just going to be training the model based on whatever information or lack of information we start to put in.
Are you seeing any like interesting applications of AI for like business development or generating new clients for like a recruiting firm?
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting things that I was looking at, and I actually found this really interesting article here from a company, Phenom.com, and they actually had a couple of interesting case studies just around specific use cases that AI was being used in. This is actually probably their client testimonials. A lot of this seems to be after that screening process in terms of how they're using it to like qualify candidates, create a better experience across those candidates too. But it's allowed them to see things like 900% more candidate profiles. And then again, using that information to train their models around what are great candidates that they should be looking for in the future based on who are great fits for the role now, to even other elements like increasing application conversion rates. And a lot of this is, again, more so from the sourcing side of things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, like, because I see so much on sourcing.
It's the hot topic. I mean, this is something that I know you and I were going to chat about.
What is the recruiting firm that's sitting there that has no clients actively, no projects? Like they're sitting there being like, what do we do? Like, what should we be investing in to like actively get more clients? Because we see it all the time. You talk to a recruiting firm, and they're either like, we have so many applicants. We know every VP of marketing on the planet. And then the other recruiting firm is like, we have exclusive rights to hire all the sales team for X massive company. We just need more salespeople, right? I feel like today, more people are in the bucket of, I have no clients right now. I honestly push back on like the AI piece there. It's like, hey, like, let's stop thinking about how can we fix this problem with AI? Like, how can we just fix this problem? A tool I always recommend to people is Self-Disrupt. Big shout out to our friends over at Self-Disrupt. Not really an AI tool, has some AI capabilities like to draft, hey, like a prospecting message and things like that, but really helps for like LinkedIn outreach, SMS, and like texting. Not much AI. That's okay. Feel free to check it out for yourself. But I know it's something that I've used that we see a ton of success with, and a lot of our customers are also mutual customers with them, which is great. I think we get sometimes too carried away with the AI piece, and we need to focus on what are the problems that a specific business is facing and how can we fix it.
We've worked in tech, you and I, together for 6 years now. And so I know that we obviously have a huge bias towards how can technology improve this stuff, because we know, especially just the way that the global economy is going. I mean, like 60% of the US, like S&P 500's tech companies, right? Like we know it's a trajectory that's going. Like the NASDAQ 100 grows by 14.6% per year for the last 10 years. Tech's ridiculous. But I think it's, to your point, that thing where there's not going to be a silver bullet, and that's okay, period. When we're thinking about increasing our productivity from every channel, we always have to think of this very straightforward concept. I know Alex Hormozi talks a lot about this concept, whether he invented it or not, of more, better, new. The first thing that everyone always thinks about is new. That should be the third thing that we do. If we're thinking about something simple like business development, right? The concept of business development is, how do I find more clients so I can actually sell things to them? You'll have a member in the team and they'll make 100 calls a week, and they're like, hey, I'm really hustling, I'm just not getting those results, right? And I know Alex has this really interesting analogy that he talked about when he was experimenting with a new marketing channel for him, and he was putting flyers on people's cars, and he puts 100 flyers out. He gets one response from the flyers, and it's actually somebody upset because he marked up this guy's Mercedes. And Alex is like, oh, I guess flyers don't work for me. He goes back to his mentor, and his mentor's like, hey, well, how many did you do? And he's like, well, we did 100 and we didn't get anything. He's like, man, like, we start initial sample size with 1,000, then we do 5,000 a day after that for the month.
Yeah.
And usually the biggest thing is just volume, right? And I think is always the thing that people just always forget about, because it sucks.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not always supposed to be fun. And it's always phenomenal if this new AI tool, this new thing can actually come in and just take that off of our plates. But at the end of the day, volume negates luck. And I think that's the hardest concept, especially when we're thinking about like business development, is we just got to do it.
So there's different firms I talk to, right? Like some folks are like super cold call heavy. That's how like they've got most of their business today. Others have never done business development, whatever, just through their sheer connections from their lifespan in like a specific industry and then moving out of that industry and recruiting for it. They've never had to make a cold call or a cold email in their life, right? Which is great, a great situation to be in. But if you want to continue moving the needle, I would 100% ask yourself, okay, if I already am getting business, either through ads, which is probably a more unlikely state for most recruiting firms, typically we see is cold calls, cold email, cold LinkedIn, or like referrals. What are the activities that we're putting into place and the quantity of those activities to get that output? Well, there's typically two decisions from there. If you know you want to expand the quantity because you make 100 calls each day and you book one meeting from those 100 calls each day, well, you can either hire a whole new person to make another 100 calls, or you can go and purchase an AI-enabled tool like Concert that will take that one person that you can only make 100 calls and turn them into be able to make 600 calls a day. And then you get that same conversion rate. Now you're booking 6 meetings. Rather than hiring an additional person, ask yourself, what technology, AI or otherwise, can we test and do a week trial with or something like that, that can potentially move the needle on, to your point. What'd you say? The quantities first?
Yeah, more, better, new.
So yeah, more. Test that. Then from there, solve that, and then go into better and new. I completely agree. And referrals, it's a little bit harder. You can figure out a way, like how many times do you ask for referrals?
Well, I think that's
a lot of these folks, they don't ask for referrals. They just get them, which is great. But imagine if you actually just ask for them. That's the way to do more.
Some people feel awkward asking. We have to understand where is the best point in our process to ask for it eloquently. If it's the first time you ever met with somebody, I'm asking you for a referral, what value have we shown to that person to earn the right to ask for a referral from somebody from their network? Where is the activation point for one of your customers based on where they go in that journey? For a lot of people, especially, it's like right after they get onboarded, the first time they use a tool and they have that aha moment. And being able to map where that is. So maybe from a recruiting standpoint, that's when you have your first placement.
I think you're right. It's all about like, when is the right time to ask for referrals? But even another way to think about it, for recruiting specifically, it's a very intent-based, like, we are not hiring, and then boom, we're hiring 4 people, right? If you try to sell to us when we're not hiring, you have to try to convince us to hire someone. That's going to be very difficult, not with your time, depending on your the type of your recruiting firm. What's one way a job gets created, a job need gets created? Someone leaving their current role. What are recruiting firms typically doing? Helping a candidate leave their current role. So there's one of the companies we work with here at Quill. What they were mentioning to me, which I think is an amazing idea, is when they help, let's say, a CFO find a new role for the client that they're currently working with, they will reach out to that company that the CFO just left, to their CEO, being like, hey, just wanted to let you know, like, we specialize in CFO searches, like XYZ. They don't really mention that they were the ones that helped dislodge that hire from, or that employee from that current company, but they know that intent is there and they can immediately action on that intent, and you're going to get a way higher response because it's so top of mind in that moment for them. So I thought it was a really interesting angle to say, hey, like, look at the companies that your candidates are leaving, because they're likely going to need to backfill that position. And don't be afraid to reach out to those leaders there. It might be a good time.
I love that idea. I know in car sales, they do something very similar, especially when there's all the car shortages. They would call people and ask if they wanted to sell their cars. They were coming to sell and they'd be like, well, how are you getting home? Do you need to look at a new car? And it was one of the biggest things that they were looking to do to actually generate business development on their side too. I think that's a genius idea.
A lot of recruiting firms I'm talking to that are super niche down right now. And I think they're benefiting from strategies like that so well because they have a focused candidate pool that they can continuously pick from.
This is a top echelon State of Recruiting 2024 article. There's been a ton of these coming out the last couple of weeks, and I love reading to see what's going on in our industry here. What they were finding is that LinkedIn made up about 41% of where we're actually finding our highest quality leads from. The second highest volume is from referrals. Then it was from in your internal database, how we're looking to source candidates, especially from where, because channel really does matter. If all of our candidates are being sourced from systems like LinkedIn, that's not only going to elongate our time to fill, because we have to go through that whole outreach process, the prospecting work, sourcing work, and then actually starting that conversation. But to your point as well, Ryan, if one of the biggest things that recruiters are looking to do is improve their overall efficiency from a business side of things, we know that that adds a ton of extra cogs when we're thinking about our top line. And so we have to think about paying for a LinkedIn recruiter licenses, sourcing licenses through something like a Sourcewell or ZoomInfo. But actually, just because we're on the topic of trends here from of articles, there is this really interesting article, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot on the back end here from Bullhorn, looking at their State of 2024 report. And to your exact point, one of the things that Bullhorn found is that 70% of placements are typically made with candidates sourced outside of a firm's database. And 66% of those externally sourced candidates already live inside of their database, but had to get sourced again. As we're looking at all these different ways that technology can move and our business can move in general, even using things like AI for candidate matching or searching for similar candidate profiles, it's only as good as the data that we put in the database.
The rate at which you'll actually get to a place where it's really changing the game for you is going to be dictated based on how narrow your niche is.
Yeah.
We talk to a lot of people and they're like, I help hire VPs of marketing for Series B companies. It's like, that is perfect. Because it's like you're so narrowly focused. And like the more narrow you can get, I would say the better as AI becomes more and more at the forefront, because it'll just be easier for it to augment your strategy for you.
Right, because it'll just be able to get trained to see what our great candidates look like based on what profiles, attributes, and skills or based on relevant experience they've had.
It's an interesting topic, man. Excited for next week.
If anybody has any ideas of topics or any guests that they'd like us to chat with as well, we'd love your referrals. It makes it a lot easier for us as well, but it also keeps the conversations nice and exciting on our side of things too.
Yeah, we got a lot of good feedback from the last episode just around like what people want us to talk about. So we'll keep that coming. We really appreciate it.
I love it. Thanks all, and we'll see you next week.